Our app is super close to being complete. We've added so much into it so far, and we are at the final stretch. This module will cover a range of different topics that will be essentially what we need to make our app look better and feel a little bit nicer overall. We're going to add some custom images so that when the user swipes left or right, they have a better sense of what's happening. Plus, it gives our app a little bit more artwork and it allows it to feel a little bit more original. Our app still doesn't track score yet, so without that, there's no way that users can tell whether the answers are right or wrong. They just have to guess that they answered right. And lastly, we don't have a conclusion for our app. It sits there idly once all the cards are gone, so we want to have a nice conclusion to let the user know you've completed running through the app. Now you can play it again or quit it. So let's give the ability to restart the game too. Remember way back when we added assets, we added an image of a cat and a dog that looked kind of like a few characters we know. We used an image for our background. We can use a similar UI image view construct to set up our images within our card view. So let's go back into our card view. And I want to create two UI image view variables as our local variables. So I'm going to call this true image, and this is a UI image view, and false image, UI image view. Let's also create another function within our class that will do the setup for these image views. So if I go here, just below here, I can say func setup images like this. And remember, when we create a function and we want to call it, we need to call it within our constructor. So I can go back in here and say self.setupImages. It's time to fill in the guts for this function. Remember with views, when we actually create the view, we need to set it to some type of frame. Thinking about the size of our images, we want the images to appear in the center of our card, and we want it to be not covering the entirety of the card, but maybe say 70% of the card. So in our setup images function, let's go ahead and set up the frame and create those image views. So I'm going to say let image frame equals CG rect. Take the CG float option here. And again, we're going to set the center a little bit after, so I don't really need to worry too much about this. So zeros for the X and Y. And the width, I'm going to say self.bounds.width. Self.bounds.height for the height. Now remember, we want to make it about 70%, so just doing a little bit of math, I can say times 0.7 for the width and times 0.7 for the height. Now those local variables we created previously, we need to actually initialize those objects. So let's go back in here and say self.trueImage is equal to a UI image view, and we can take the frame and let it be the image frame. Same thing with the false image. Here. So I'm creating those objects now. The next thing I want to do is set the actual image for those image views. Before, when we were editing our UI image view, we were doing it in the storyboard. So we were able to set the actual image in the attribute editor in our storyboard. So we had some convenient tools. Now that we're in code, how do we set the image to our image view? Well, we can use the image property for our UI image view. And here's a really cool Swift trick. If I go in and type self.trueImage.image, it's expecting a UI image. Now, I can create a UI image object if I want to and specify the name that we had. But what's really cool with the assets in Xcode is that I can call the assets like this. If I type true you'll notice that one of the options, aside from the Boolean we see, if we go down, there's a true icon. So Xcode knows what assets you have, and it knows you're looking for an image, so it can say, hey, well, you have an image here called true icon. Is that what you wanted? And when I type enter, you'll notice that the icon is actually popped up right next to the image. This is a really cool thing Xcode does that makes it a little bit more visual in your code so you know what image you're setting it to. I can do the same thing with my faults. And you can see the little image there. It's really nice and handy if you have a ton of different images and you need to make sure you got the right thing. We still need to center the image. So we can go in and say self.trueImage.center is equal to self.center. Same thing with our fault image is equal to self.center. The last thing we need to do is we've created the UI image views, but again, with how views work, we still need to add the view to our main view as a subview. So let's do that. Self.add subview, self.trueImage, self.add subview, self.faultImage. Okay. So let's go ahead and check to see how this looks in our app. When we run this, we'll notice that there's a few things that's wrong here. Well, for one, they're just popped up in our card on top of each other. That's not what we want. We'll also notice that they're both kind of skewed. It doesn't look perfect. Let's discuss the skewed image first. The reason that the image is skewed is by default, UI image views set their content to be what's known as scaleToFill. That means that for the given space for this image view, it tries to expand the image out to fill up the entirety of the size of the image view. And because our image view isn't the exact same specifications of our image, it's not keeping the same aspect ratio of our image and therefore kind of pulling it more in one way than the other way. In order to resolve this, we can change the content mode of our image view to something else. There's another property we can use that's called scaleAspectFit. And what this mode does is it tries to expand the image to fill the view while maintaining the aspect. So it may not fill it entirely if it can't, but the nice thing about this is it keeps the image aspect the same and it doesn't make it look skewed. So let's set that content mode back in our function. So before I add the subview here, and let's actually just do it before I set the center, just to show you, we'll do self.trueImage.content mode. So again, this is the mode that will change how our image is displayed. And remember the dot syntax I showed you. If we type dot, you'll see all the different options we have. And you'll see that there's these two, scaleAspectFill and scaleAspectFit. The one we want here is scaleAspectFit. So if I do this again, content for the default image, scaleAspectFit, and I run this one more time, you'll notice now that the cat image and the dog image don't look so skewed. They look the way that they should. Cool, that's one step further. There was one other issue that I mentioned before, and that's, well, the images are just popping up. I can't even read the statement that's on the card, and they shouldn't be up here at the beginning anyways. We mentioned that we only want these to pull up as the user begins swiping, and we want it to kind of slowly be visible as they're swiping through. The way that we can adjust these images is using a property known as the alpha. The alpha value is a transparency value from 0 to 1, where if it's 0, it's completely invisible. You cannot see it. But if it's 1, then it's entirely visible. Whereas in between, you'll see that you can kind of see through the image and it'll slowly begin to become visible. Thinking about the alpha value, we can link this with our panning. So as the user begins panning to the right, it might slowly start appearing, and we could adjust the alpha value based on how the user pans, which is really cool and adds a lot more of, again, that kind of animation effect within our app. To start off, let's set the alpha value to 0 so that we cannot see it at the beginning. Going back in here, I'm just going to make another section right here where it's self.trueImage.alpha is equal to 0.0. Same thing with the false. Alpha is equal to 0.0. So if we run this again, we shouldn't see either of those images. So running it, you notice that they are no longer there. They are still technically there, they're just invisible. We can go back into our view controller in our panning function. And this is where we can actually set the alpha value to become more visible as the user starts panning around. Let's think a little bit about the math involved here. Again, this isn't a math class, and I don't know what level of math you guys have, but I want to keep this as simple as possible, so I'll try to explain as best I can what this math function does. Previously, we did a little bit of math to calculate whether the card should be swiped true or false. Similarly, we could do something to figure out whether the card is moving to the right or left and sort of give a percentage of how much it's going. And that way we can link that to our alpha value to increase the alpha value as you move it a certain direction. So real quick, I'm just going to put the code right here on the screen so you guys can see it, and I'll give some explanation on it. Because we are only calculating half of the screen, one half being the dog image and one half being the cat image, we can go ahead and cut our width of our view in half. So that's setting up our total width. We can then figure out sort of the percentage and get this alpha rating by calculating the current center with our original center divided by this new width. And again, this will give us a normalized value between 0 and 1, which is what the alpha rating is, to figure out where percentage-wise the card is on a certain half of the screen. I don't want you to get caught up too much on the math here. This is really just something that I feel like as you start learning the program, you will start to be able to utilize a lot of this basic math. And to be honest, a lot of programming doesn't involve very complex math. So let me quickly type this out in our code editor here. So before I set the actual center, this is where I'm going to want to add this check. So I can say let total width equals self.view.bounds.width divided by 2. And I can let the alpha rating equal our new card view center dot x minus the card view dot original center. Remember, because we want to get the difference between the new center and the original center. And I forgot the dot x here. Again, we only care about the x values in this case. And we want to divide this by the total width that we calculated above. And let me just print out, let me get rid of this translation here, and let me print out the alpha rating so we can look at what the values are before we start adding it to our alpha. So as you can see, as I start panning to the right, I'm getting a value. Let me just kind of make this bigger so you guys can see it. So as I'm panning to the right, you'll notice that the value is slowly increasing to 1. And if I go to the left, it's going in the negative direction. This seems like it would work very well for our alpha rating. And the great thing about this is If an alpha is a negative value, it doesn't do anything else. It still stays invisible, so we can take advantage of that. So let me show you what I mean. Back down here, we're going to actually get rid of the alpha rating print. And here I can say card view dot true image dot alpha is equal to alpha rating, and card view dot false image dot alpha is equal to negative alpha rating. Let's think about this one more time. As I'm going to the right, I'm getting a value between 0 and 1, which is perfect because that's what we want for our true image. So we can just set our true image to that alpha rating for the alpha. Now, when it's going from the middle to the left, we're getting a value between 0 and negative 1, which is great because then what will happen is we're setting both of our alpha ratings to the negatives of each other, which means if we're going to the right and we're at, say, value 0.6, our false image alpha rating will be negative 0.6, which again, negative 0.6 is basically 0. It's just invisible. Now, if we go to the left and we have some value like negative 0.6, then we have the negative of it, and our true image is going to be a negative value, but our false image is going to be positive, meaning if we go to the right, our true image, or the dog image, will slowly start to appear, but the cat image will still be invisible. But if we're going to the left, then it's the exact opposite, where the cat image will slowly be visible. So let's see if this actually worked. So if I slowly start dragging this to the right, you'll notice, sweet, the dog is actually starting to pop up. So it's giving the user some type of validation that swiping one way is going to do something. Now what happens if I swipe it to the left? Well, the cat image is appearing. This is awesome because none of the other images are overlapping each other. They're coming up based on the way that we're selecting it. This is super cool, and it's already adding a lot more character to our app, and it's even giving it the same feeling that we kind of expect based on the statements that we added in this card. Our app still isn't really a game yet. We need to add the score, and to add the score, we need to even add our own answers into each of these. So let's do that. So let's add some labels into our storyboard and link that up back into our view controller. So if I go back in to our main.storyboard, kind of bring that down, bring this back up, we can go ahead and search for a label and add this in. And we'll kind of place it where we think it should go. Again, we aren't going to go into something known as auto layout, which is pretty much a way that allows us to create these different interfaces and handle multiple devices. We will be talking about auto layout in most likely another segment, so stay tuned for something like that coming up. The label right here, I'm going to want to just put 0 for now, but we're obviously going to change this later on. And we want to change the color because it's too dark. So I'm going to set this to be white. I want to change the font, so we can go ahead and do custom. We can keep it at Helvetica New, and I'm going to want to do this as bold, and we can do something like 24. Done. Also, I want to align this in the center, and we can expand it out a bit just so it's visible, and then we can put it kind of up at the top here. Now I can do Command C and Command V to paste another label, because we're going to want another label here that's going to inform the user that this number just is not a number, it's points. So here I can say points, and I want to do a slight adjustment here. I'm going to make this regular instead of bold, and let's make it a little bit smaller. There we go. And I can kind of adjust this down a little bit and have it just kind of sitting right beneath the number. So I want to link the score into our view controller Swift, So that way we can update the number as the score is incremented. So if I alt-click again the view controller, and I can kind of close this so you guys have more room to see. And I control-click up here, and let's just go all the way to the top. Actually, before I do that, let's make some space up here. So I'm just going to make some space up here for you guys. So if I just control-click up here, we'll create another outlet, and we'll call this score label. We keep everything else the same. Sweet. Now we have our score label. We don't need to really worry about the points label because we're not going to change it in any way. So we don't need to connect it right now. We will also need our actual score stored as a variable. So down here, I can say var score int is equal to 0. So we will start with the 0 score. We can't actually check to see whether they answered it correctly because we haven't even stored the answers ourselves yet. Let's just go in real quick, and if you take a look at our view controller, you'll see our statements. We have all the statements up here, but there's no answers attributed to each of the statements. We can take advantage of another data structure rather than an array to also contain all the answers. This is known as a dictionary. A dictionary is a collection which contains an association of a key to its value. If you think about those old-fangled things called a dictionary, you'll remember that the way you looked up something was you looked up the word to get its definition. Similarly, we're going to get a key to find its value. Or in the case of our statements, here's an example of what a dictionary would look like. So you can see this looks very similar to an array in how it's constructed. But rather than just having a list of values, we have a list of some type of key, which is the statement, to its value, which is the answer. This is exactly what we need because now we can iterate through this dictionary and get the statement like we did before, but then now also have the answer stored. There are a few keynotes about dictionaries. One is that all the keys have to be the same type and all the values have to be the same type. In our case, the statements are all string, so the keys will be string. The values will be bool, or true or false. So they're all the same type on each end, which is good. Another thing to note about dictionaries is that it's known as an unordered collection. When I create an array, this is known as an ordered collection, or the way that it's created comes in and is shown the same way. The third item in the array is always the third item in the array. However, with the dictionary, this isn't always the case. It's going to be an unordered collection, so we can't necessarily rely on finding something based on where it's at in the dictionary. We have to utilize the key in order to find the value. This is also okay for us because we don't care about the order. We're just going through each statement. So in our situation, this works perfectly. So let's go back in our view controller. And I'm just going to remove this entire statements variable. Now, this is where you can go look in the resources and copy the dictionary that we provide for you. Again, I don't want you to type all this stuff out. There's a lot of stuff to type. So we're just going to give you the actual piece of code to copy and paste here. So here, I'm just going to paste something that I copied. And again, you have all the resources you need. And if you look, it looks almost exactly like what we had before. However, now we have this colon along with the actual answer to each of these statements for each item. This is going to give us some errors in our code because when we initially looped through an array, it was the assumption that it was an array. Now that we have a dictionary, this won't work yet. This is really simple. all we need to do is go back down to where we are looping through our previous array, and instead we're going to add a parentheses here, and we can add another variable here called answer. And this fixes our issue with the error. So when looping through, it's very similar to looping through an array where we go through item after item. In this case, however, we're now looping through not just one item, but the statement as well as the answer that it's linked to. Our card class does not yet have a variable for the answer, so let's add that as a local variable. So going back to the very top here, and I can create another answer. That's a bool. Sweet. Because our card views should have a statement as well as an answer for every single card, we can actually add another constructor that will take in the question and the answer as values or parameters. But we already have our constructor with this override and init right here. Well, this leads me to another coding buzzword called a convenience initializer. This is a secondary form in constructing our object. We can take different parameters, pass it in and set it how we want to, and still construct our object. Let me show you how that is in code. So right below our previous constructor, we can say convenience init. And here we can take a few different parameters. In this case, I want to still take the frame in because we'll need that to construct our view. I also will need the statement, which is a string, as well as the answer, that's a Boolean. Now the only thing that our convenience initializer is going to do is we're just going to call self.init with the frame, which is doing all the other stuff it did up here. So we don't need to do that over again. We're just going to call that because it's the same. Since we have the statement now, we can say self.statementLabel.text is equal to the statement here. And we can set the answer equal to answer. So you can see how this convenience initializer does help us because we can pass in more data that will allow us to do things outside of a standard constructor. Now, if we go back into our view controller, where we're actually creating the statement card, we can go ahead and get rid of this. And when we try to construct this object, you'll notice now we have multiple ways to construct it. The third one being the one we just did. So now I can type in card frame as what we had before. And now I can pass in the statement and the answer. The nice thing is we can also remove this statement because we're already doing it in our convenience initializer. Let me just play that to see if everything's working. Great. Now you'll notice that the statement is still being shown on our card, but it's happening now in the convenience initializer. We still don't have our answer linked up, even though it's stored in our card. So let's do some checks to see if the user gets the answer right. We just added our new convenience initializer to store the answer within our card view. The next thing we need to do is update the score. But when does the score need to be updated? When the user is dragging their finger around on the screen, there doesn't need to be a score calculated yet. It's when the user lifts their finger and they are actually answering the card, that's when the score should be updated. If we go back to our view controller, you'll remember that we actually had a function called answer card. So this is the perfect place to do it. If you look on our answer card, we already have the answer that the user is inputting based on where they're swiping, and we have the answer stored in our card view. So a simple conditional to check if these two are equal is what we need here. So in where we're getting our card view, we can say if card view dot answer is equal to the answer. Here we can increment our score, and we can also set the score label to the score value. Self.score is plus equal 1. And you'll notice that I'm using this new kind of syntax, plus equals. This is just a simpler way of adding 1 to our score. And if you remember how we set the actual text, we need to make it a string and not an int by putting it in quotations and wrapping the variable like this. And this will print out the score within our text. That's pretty much it for the score. Let's run the app to see if it works. Almost done, almost done. Okay. So now let's see if the score actually gets updated. I don't know all these answers off the top of my head, so I might get it wrong the first one. I'm pretty sure this isn't the right game they played. I think they played a slightly different game. And if I swipe false, you'll see that, awesome, it's adding my score up. So now I'm getting an extra point. That one I wasn't entirely sure, so let's make sure this wasn't a fluke. So Star Wars Return of the Jedi was not directed by George Lucas. I do know the answer to that, and I know he did not direct it. He directed the first two, but he didn't direct the last one. So if I put this towards true, you'll notice I still get a point. Now we have our own little quiz game. How awesome is that? The users can now check their scores, and you can even challenge your friends to see who gets the highest score on their first pass through. Though I'm sure you've looked through all the answers, so you probably have a bit of an advantage. We can run through and test our friends' knowledge, but remember, if we just go through each card and just mark true on all of them, you'll notice we still don't have a way to restart. So you can finish the game and you might have to quit out the app and then rerun the app. That's not what we want our users to experience. Let's add a good way to restart the game. So we'll do that in the next section. With every great story needs a conclusion. That's why in our app we need our own conclusion, or a way to wrap things up, to let the user not just sit in utter silence with an empty screen. Also, we can congratulate them or congratulate you for finishing your app. So let's add that. I want to add a label to congratulate the user. So let's go in and go back to our storyboard, and similar to what we did with the score, we can create another set of labels. So again, if this label doesn't pop up here, just make sure you type label in here to pull this up. We'll drag this in here, and we'll put it roughly at the center of the screen. And I want to make this let's make this about the width. And we'll say congratulations. And the color, let's go ahead and set more of a yellow color here. So we can set a yellow color here, and I can set the font to Helvetica New Bold. And let's do 22. And let's make sure it doesn't get cut off. We'll put it in the center here. So we'll center it. Again, this is not using auto layout, so we are just going to kind of place it as best we can so you guys can visually see it. So I can Command C and Command V to copy and paste. And here, I'm just going to give a little congratulatory message to you. And it's too big, so let's kind of put it at regular and shrink it down a little bit. Here we go. Perfect. One other thing that we're going to need to add is our button, so the user can actually restart the game if they so choose. So in here, I'm going to type button and drag this button right down here into the center. Let's make it a little bigger here, like so. And let's go ahead and say play again. And I want to change the font for this one just to keep everything kind of aligned. We can do that. Let's set our text color to white, but we should also set a background color. So let's set the background color to something a little bit more. You can choose whatever color you like here. I'm just going to do kind of a light, let's do kind of this lighter red here. Again, we create these elements, but we do want to have control over them in our code. So we need to connect it. So again, holding Option or Alt, click the View controller, and we'll kind of close these down so you can see better. Let's take the congratulations. Let's go back up to the top. And so we're going to take the congratulations and Control click just below the score label. And we'll call this the end title label. Connect. The same thing for the one beneath it. We're going to do end subtitle label. And then the button itself, let's go ahead and play again button. So same thing, Control, drag it in, play again button. So you'll notice it created a UI label and title label, another UI label and subtitle label, and a UI button, play again button. We have the button object, but we also want to add some type of action from our button. So when the user presses it, it actually does something. We can easily do that here. If we go to the very bottom, and if I Control click again on the play again button in this empty area within our class, rather than selecting outlet as a connection, we can change this to action. Here, I can say play again action, and if I connect it, you'll see I get another function called play again, which will run this code whenever the user presses the button. There is something that I should note here. Going back into the view controller, you'll see that we're doing a lot of this code for creating the cards within our viewDidLoad, which only occurs when the view first loads. This isn't what we want, because when we restart the game, we want to recreate these cards and add them back in. What we can do now is we can take all this code from the viewDidLoad, put it in its own function, and that way we can call that function in multiple locations. Again, more modularity within our code. So if I just go right above here and say func setup cards, I can take all this code right here, cut it with Command X, and paste it with Command V. Now I have my function set up, but now I need to recall that. So self.setupCards here. Now that I have everything in a function, in my play action button, I can rerun the setup cards. We added a few label elements and the button into our storyboard. However, they don't need to be shown at the beginning. They only need to be shown when we're out of cards. What we want to do is we want to hide these elements away and have them animate in when the user completes their game. In our view controller, I can create another function to do all the hiding. So let's add that. If I say func hide completion elements, and then remember we have to call our function, so self.hide completion elements in our viewDidLoad down here. With our labels, I don't want to change the alphas like we did with the image. I want them to kind of pop up from the bottom and animate in. What I could do is I could move those labels below the screen from our iPhone, and then when we finish the game, those labels can then animate back into the center. So let's do that. I'm going to set this end title label transform property to a CG-affine transform. This is another new object that is provided for us. And I don't want to get so in depth with talking about transforms because it does involve a little bit more math and can get a little bit complicated. But for this example, we can create something very simple, and I'll show you how this works. So again, this one has multiple ways of constructing the object, and the one we're going to want is translation X and Y. This simply means that we're moving these labels in a specific coordinates specified in our X and Y. So we want those labels to be at the bottom, below the screen. What I can do here is I can set my translation X to 0 because we're not going to move it left or right. And our Y, we can do, say, 1,000, which means that it's going to go 1,000 points below the center, and it's going to have those labels there. So they're still going to be there, but you can't see them because they're so far below. I want to do the same thing with the end subtitle label. So I'm going to set this transform, set the affine transform like this. We still need to adjust the play again button because it shouldn't be there right at the beginning either. In the case of the play again button, I just want to hide that and mess with the alpha so that way we can animate that to just kind of pop in, similar to the images. Going back in the hide completion elements, I can say self.playAgainButton.alpha is equal to 0.0. So I'm setting it to be hidden. I also want to make sure that it's fully hidden. So just to be safe, I'm going to say self.playAgainButton.isHidden is equal to true. One last thing is I kind of like having all my views to have kind of this cornered edge. So similar to what we did with our card view, I'm going to say self.playAgainButton.layer.corner radius is equal to 8.0. Just to give my corners a little bit more of an less of an edge. Now, one thing I did actually mess up on that I just realized is down in my view did load, I'm hiding the completion elements. I actually don't want it in here, and I want it in the setup cards function. The reason is when we restart the game, it's not going to hide the completion elements if it's called down here. So to fix that, my little error, I'm just going to get out of there, and then at the end of this loop, I'm going to do self.hide completion elements here. That way, when I play again, it'll re-hide those elements. I want the labels to animate and the button to reappear as soon as the user's complete. Let's make a function to do that. So just below here, I can make a function, animate completion elements, like this. And remember, we've done animations before in a previous module, so we'll use the similar concept. UIView.animate, and here I'm going to use this one right here. This one is slightly different from the one we constructed before. It's a little bit more complex, and I'll tell you why we are using this one. So let's set the time interval to 4 seconds. We don't want any sort of delay. So the delay is just when it starts and waits a certain amount of time before it actually starts the animation. We have these options right here. And if I, again, hit dot, you'll see a bunch of options pop up. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to use this curve ease in and out. This is an animation term that just allows the animation to look a little bit more natural. Again, we have an animation block here, so I can type the open curly brace and hit enter to create that block. And here we're going to want to animate those labels back. Again, I don't want to get too in-depth with transforms and how they work because they can be a little bit confusing. But what's great to know is if we want to bring our labels back to where they were, we can do something like this. Self.end title label dot transform, so this is the transform we adjusted before, is equal, and if I type dot, we have this property identity. So there's something known as an identity transform, which simply moves your label back to where you originally placed it. So we did that for the end title label. Let's do that for the end subtitle label as well. Dot identity. Again, this is going to take those labels that we placed way at the bottom of the screen and just bring them back up to the top. Now you'll see one other option here that we didn't mess with before, and that's this completion block. Now I don't want to get super in depth with this because there is a lot of information behind this, but what's great with a lot of these functions is they provide us with a completion block. For example, with the animation, it's going to run this animation, but we need a way to run some more code when the animation finishes. We can't just put code right after the animation function because it's not run in synchronous. Because of this, we want a block of code that is sort of dedicated there to be ran as soon as the animation's complete. So here we have this completion, and you'll notice that it has this bool to void, and this means that we're being provided a variable that's a Boolean. And in this case, the completion is simply whether the animation was successful or unsuccessful. So if I type here, excuse me, if I go down here and hit tab, and I do an open curly brace here, enter, we'll create another block for that. Now, because we're getting a variable in, normally we would want to take this in like that, success in. What this means is that because this completion block is giving us back a variable, we need to capture it. That's what this success in means. The success is a Boolean variable of whether it's true or false. However, because we don't need this variable, we're not going to use it, we can substitute this for an underscore like this. This just simply means we're not capturing the value, we don't care about it, just leave it. Last thing we need to do is we need to unhide the play again button and then turn back the alpha to set it to 1. I can say self.playAgainButton.isHidden is equal to false. So this makes it not hidden anymore, but it's still invisible because the alpha is set to 0. Now, to get the alpha set back, we can use another UI view animate for this as well. So if I type UIView.animate, here we could use a simple version, 0.7, just 0.7 seconds would probably be roughly what we want. And we can make another animation block here with open curly brace. And then I press enter, creates the block. Now I can say self.playAgainButton.alpha is equal to 1. So it will animate that alpha back up. So we have the animation for the completion elements, but we need to actually call this function. So let's think about where this needs to be called. If we go to our answer card, you'll notice that this is where we're taking the card off and we're appending the score. This seems like a good spot to put this because we can check to see if we have no more cards left, then we should run the completion elements, right? And again, to check to see if there are no cards left, we can run this in a conditional like this. So right below here, I can say if self.cardViews, and to check how many items are in the array, we can call a property called count. Now this will return back an integer of how many items are left. And in this case, we want to say if this is 0, then we want to actually animate those completion elements back in. So here, I can say self.animate completion elements. In our answer card, you can see that we're popping each card and we're appending the score and just doing the swipe function as needed. And then if the card count reaches 0, then we can animate the labels and the play again button back in. There is one last thing. If you go back down to our play again action, it's still empty, so the button doesn't do anything yet. This is really easy. We just need to say self.setupCards. Remember, in our view.did_load, we called the setup cards to run and create all the cards and then hide the completion elements. So we pretty much just want to do the same exact thing when the view loaded, so we just call self.setupCards. Now is the moment of truth. Let's see if all the things we added is there. I feel like I'm going to just try to play the game. I don't even know the answers to all of them, so I don't even think I can get a full score off of this. But yeah. All right, so now we have our view. Looks good. We have our score being displayed. All the labels and the button, the play again button, is not there. So luckily, we're doing good so far. Now, on the Millennium Falcon, R2-D2 and Chewbacca played a game called Darnic Faults. Return of the Jedi was not directed. Luke was 23 years old in A New Hope. No, he wasn't. Ah! See, I don't have all the answers. Boba Fett's mother is Cara Fett. False. I think he's a bounty hunter. He just doesn't have a mom. Gamorreans are the aliens that are guarding Jabba the Hutt's planet. I think that's true. The name Yoda means warrior. I think that's true. Yes. Chewbacca's homeworld is Kashyyyk. True? Yes. Tibetan is the closest language to that of the Ewoks. True. Yes. Yoda is modeled after Albert Einstein. Of course. December 10th is the official Star Wars Day. It's May 4th. May the 4th be with you. Allie's birthday. Hi, Allie. False. I almost put true on that one. Whoops. Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker are twins. That is true. I got 10 out of 10. You'll see that the labels pop up with congratulations, you've successfully built your first app. Woo! And the play again button is animated in. So you can see that we're now getting, things just aren't randomly popping up and just saying like, you're done, you're completed. We're getting a sense of feeling, and the animation's adding a bit of effect for us that gives us a more natural feeling with our app. And last but not least, we need to try to play again. So let's try to play this again. So if I hit play again, you'll see that the cards are started over again, but wait, the score is still 10. If we're going to give this to our friends and they're going to play with each other, we need to reset the score. So let's look at this, because this is a bug. So let's take a look. So let's look at where our score is being set. If we look at the top, we will notice that we're setting it to 0 here, but we're only setting it once. We're not resetting it back. This is a simple fix. We just got to go back in our setup cards and go self.score is equal to 0. We also need to update the label, remember, because the score is its own variable, but we also need to set the label. So self.score label is equal to self.score. Remember, we got to turn it into a string, and I forgot one little thing here, self.score label.text. Remember, we're not setting the label to the actual string, we're setting the text to the string. That should be it. Let's go ahead and run that and see if all that works. So if I just run through it one more time, I just mark true for all of them. And we should get our completion, pops up beautifully. We got the button. If we hit play again, our points are reset back to 0, and we can give this to a friend to play and try to beat our score. I'm not going to say this app is 100% foolproof, because there are spots that are still sort of buggy, and this is not coded in the most optimal way, and it shouldn't be. I didn't make this to be the perfect app. I made this something that would as best as I can, help show you all the different things that you can do using Swift, using storyboards in iOS, and all the great little features that Apple provides for you. I don't want you guys to stop here. I want you guys to improve on this and even make it your own. If you want to use different artwork, by all means, you have the tools to do it. If you want to change the statements, you have the tools to do it. You can create your own type of app that doesn't have to be these questions or statements. You can make your own thing. You can even turn this into a completely different type of game, or better yet, make it a type of flashcard game. You have so many different tools at your disposal now that I know will challenge you and sort of force you to really go beyond just this course and really read up and learn more.